There's something
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to you, our TADAT audience from around the world. Welcome to this special live TADAT podcast recording of GovTech in India, inspired by TADAT. Joining us today are Assistant Director of the Fiscal Affairs Department at the International Monetary Fund, Mr. Ruud de Moij, and from Ludhiana, India, in the state of Punjab, we have Ms. Poonam Sidhu, Commissioner of Income Tax at India Revenue Service. We invite you to send your questions to our panelists by sending them to our podcast at tadat.org email account. So without much further delay, over to you, Ruud.
Thank you very much, Annette. So I also wish to welcome everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, to this TADAT live videocast event. And a special warm welcome to Poonam, with whom I'm going to have a conversation about both about GovTech, which are exciting developments for many countries, and it would be very interesting to hear the experience from you, Poonam. But before we go to the issues of GovTech and TADAT, maybe you can say a little bit about yourself, background, your career, your organization, so that we get to know you a little bit better. So who are you, Poonam?
Thank you so much, Ruud, for having me, and let me wish all your viewers and those joining the podcast. So grateful for the opportunity to tell what India is doing in the area of taxation and coping with the pandemic using GovTech. I belong to the Indian Revenue Service, the batch of 1987. Recruitment to the Indian Revenue Service in India is through the civil services exam. And we also have recruitment through the Staff Selection Commission at lower levels of ITO, inspector, tax assistant, who then get promoted, stenographers, who then get promoted through the ranks. The Indian Revenue Service selections are through the Civil Services exam, which is an all India exam. I'm ancient. Since I'm born in the batch of 1987, so I've been in service for almost 33 years. The Indian Revenue Service is the federal government's revenue service. In India, we have the government of India, and then we have states, and each of the states has its own government. So taxation is a central subject, and the government administers the Income Tax Act, and the Finance Ministry is the controlling ministry. The Minister of Finance is the minister in charge, and there is a Secretary Revenue, and the service is administered by the Central Board of Direct Taxes, which is headed by a chairman and has 6 members. Under the Central Board of Direct Taxes, in the apex scale, there are 26 chief commissioners. And under each of those chief commissioners, there are principal chief commissioners. And under each of those principal chief commissioners, there are several chief commissioners, such as me. I look after the Regional Faceless Assessment Center, which the officers of the REFAC Ludhiana are seated across the state of Punjab and also the union territories of Jammu, Kashmir, and Ladakh. that's a little bit about me.
Okay, thank you. This is very interesting. It's interesting to hear how a country like India organizes its affairs and also know your position in it. I saw in some of your materials that you presented a very nice slogan, the India Revenue Service, about honoring the honest.
Yes,
Can you say a little bit more about that?
certainly. So the direct tax reforms that were initiated by Prime Minister Modi, and I say that because he launched the Transparent Taxation Platform. And the Transparent Taxation Platform with the slogan, Honoring the Honest, is intended to be a part of the structural reforms in direct taxation initiated by India. It provides faceless assessments, faceless appeals, and a taxpayer's charge. The government has also notified service standards within the taxpayer's charter, and I hope we'll be sharing the presentation that we have on the Transparent Taxation Platform, because it includes the taxpayer's charter. The Prime Minister wants the department to run people-centric and public-friendly lines. So the initiatives focus on minimum government and maximum governance. That too is a slogan that, that is part of his inputs to the department. So through the platform, taxpayers who are prompt in complying with the tax laws will benefit, and every taxpayer is considered honest, will be treated so unless there is reason to believe otherwise. So that's what it stands for, transparent taxation, honoring the honest. The platform, it is hoped, will create awareness of the taxpayers and help them understand. The field officers now can no longer undertake any surveys without necessary permissions, and the complexity in the tax rates is sought to be reduced. The faceless assessment is a flagship program, and what it basically means is that if I were to compare what the system we had earlier and what we now have, faceless assessments, if your case was selected in scrutiny by the department, it meant you would have to go, the jurisdiction for taxpayers was territorial. So you would have to go to your local tax office in response to a physically received notice or an emailed notice, and attend the office in a face-to-face proceeding. You might have to come several times, and where the notices are sent in bulk, there oftentimes is a long waiting period. So taxpayers tended to find that took up a lot of time, and now all proceedings are conducted online and facelessly. What that means is that there is no physical or territorial jurisdiction. If your case is selected in scrutiny, it is allocated, machine allocated, to an officer who could be seated anywhere in India, and the case would be done entirely online, facelessly. You won't know who the officer is, and all your proceedings are conducted online. And after the draft assessment order is framed, it goes to the National Faceless Assessment Center, who then puts it through a risk analysis. And after that, if it does the risk analysis, it comes back to the assessing officer to finalize. However, if they detect mistakes, it goes into a review. After review, with the inputs of the review unit, this will then go to another assessing officer, to a second assessing officer, to incorporate a fresh assessment or the inputs from the review unit. Now, this, it is hoped, will be very objective, very transparent, and impose a minimum burden on the taxpayer. Seated in the comfort of your home, and actually handle your tax affairs. Also, the taxpayer has control now. Earlier, you relied on an authorized representative who went to the office, handled your affairs, and came back and gave you feedback. Now, with the online, transparent order sheets of what went on at each hearing available to you, the taxpayer is in control of his own affairs. So that's about faceless assessments. In India, once an assessment is finalized and the order is set on you, then it is up to the taxpayer to file an appeal. The first appeal lies to what we call the Commissioner of Appeals, and the appeals are also now faceless. Earlier, when you filed an appeal, again, you attended an office physically, either personally or through your authorized representative. Now, all you have to do is to file your appeal online and submit your responses to the queries raised by the Commissioner of Appeals or your objections to the assessment that has been framed. And the Commissioner of Appeals could be anyone sitting anywhere, and there is complete facelessness in those proceedings as well. The Taxpayers Charter, of course, we've spoken about, and the Taxpayers Charter essentially lays down that the taxpayer will be treated as honest, will provide fair, courteous, reasonable treatment, timely decisions, collect only the right amount of tax, respect the privacy of the taxpayer, and provide the mechanism for appeal and review, and provide complete and accurate information. So in return, we do expect our taxpayers to be honest and compliant, and to be informed, to keep accurate records, know what the representative does, respond in time, and pay in time. Additionally, in the Taxpayers Charter, we undertake to reduce the cost of compliance, to provide a fair and just system, to provide mechanisms to lodge complaints, to hold our authorities accountable, to maintain confidentiality, and to publish service standards. So, as of now, there are two grievance redressal mechanisms. One is the e-Nivaran, and the other is the CP Grams facility, which is monitored by the Prime Minister's office. And on an average, most grievances are resolved within a month.
Thank you so much. No, this is very fascinating. It's interesting you say the slogan of honest is so much improved by the sort of faceless and more objective way in which taxpayers are assessed, and also the other way around, that it's easier for taxpayers to be honest because you have the compliance cost, and
yes.
So it's very interesting to hear.
There's another wonderful initiative, Ruud. We're collecting a lot of information about taxpayers from different sources. And most of that information goes into profiling the taxpayer. And the wonderful initiatives that we hope to introduce, that we've tried to introduce now, is the Prefilled Return, where the transactions that are within the knowledge of the department show up, and you can actually incorporate those into the returns that you file. And we're encouraging compliance by sharing the information available to us and providing a sort of fair and just system.
Very good. So you asked whether the presentation will be shared. I can confirm that it will be shared with everyone who is listening or watching. So I really recommend everyone to have a look at it, because it's a very nice overview of all the issues that you just described also in terms of the context of honoring the honest. No, this is very exciting. So maybe, Poonam, we go back to your TADAT experience. I know you're a TADAT, a certified assessor.
Yes.
Can you tell me a bit about your experience? When did you hear about it? What is your experience doing the TADAT?
The TADAT training was extremely useful, based as it is on international best practices. It provides a perspective within which to benchmark, the various initiatives that we undertake, and the processes and projects that we have in place. So when we look at the TADAT performance outcome area, and you look at the integrity of the registered taxpayer base, I'm very happy to tell you that in India, we have what is called the permanent account number, which meets most of the most of the requirements of the registration of taxpayers, the maintenance of a complete and accurate taxpayer database that is fundamental to our administration. Is now mandatory for most transactions. PAN enables us, therefore, to pull together the financial transactions undertaken by a taxpayer. Is also the basis for the GST, the goods and services tax, so that going forward, there could be a sharing of data using this common denominator. The effective risk management POA, I think, is brought in through computer-aided selection. The returns filed are all sifted using criteria that are identified by the department as requiring further investigation, further inquiry, and it helps to improve. It helps to minimize the risk of evasion. The POA for supporting voluntary compliance is met through the prefilled returns. The on-time filing of declarations, the on-time payment of taxes, of course, monitored through three areas that we have. There's interest that is charged on late filing, on late deposit of tax. There's also penalties that are imposed, and then there's prosecution. So prosecution actually end up in imprisonment from 3 months upwards. But it's a tool in our arsenal that we don't use without very careful criteria that has been laid down by the government. So primarily it's interest and also penalties that are imposed for late filing or late deposit of taxes. The accurate reporting in declarations is again enforced through penalties and prosecution. And we also have very effective tax dispute resolution mechanisms. So apart from the mutual agreement procedure for international disputes, we have, as I mentioned, the first appellate authority, the Commissioner of Appeals. Second appeal lies to the tax tribunal, and after that to the High Court, and finally the Supreme Court. There was also, India also has an extremely efficient advanced pricing arrangement mechanism. It's been appreciated and they've done full work. We had a settlement commission as well in place that essentially, was in a position to settle search cases and other cases, which has now been replaced by a body comprising of 3 chief commissioners. And we also had an authority for advanced ruling, which is also in the, when you're undertaking a transaction, if you wanted an advanced ruling, that was in place. We have a similar mechanism now through be replaced by an advanced ruling board, which again will be manned by 2 chief commissioners. So there's a lot of dispute resolution mechanisms in place to meet the performance outcome area of effective dispute resolution. And I think it's also opportune to mention that the government had introduced an extremely taxpayer-friendly scheme called Vivad Se Vishwas, which effectively translates in English to from disputes to confident partnerships, I guess. So what this basically did was that any tax demand comprises 3 parts: a quantum demand, interest, and penalty. The government was willing to forego the interest and penalty if the quantum demand was deposited immediately. And the scheme was extremely successful, and we've been able to resolve a litigation that had been pending for very long. All of this can be Googled. It's also detailed available on the income tax website. I'd encourage you all to visit it, incometaxindia.gov.in. And there's also excellent time series data that is available to 2017 and also subsequent years, which lay down the cost of the tax GDP ratio, the breakup of taxes, etc. So that should be interesting to visit for all of you. And I'd recommend that you visit it. And finally, we come to efficient revenue management and accountability and transparency. So I think on that score, on that performance outcome area of accountability and transparency, with the new direct tax reforms, I would think that we rank fairly high. It would not be out of place to say that a lot of the performance outcome areas really based they are on best practices informs the direct tax reforms that have taken place.
That's very interesting. Thank you so much. So I hear you say we use TADAT very much as a benchmark exercise for various performance areas. And it was very nice to hear you speak about very much internalized all the performance outcome areas very well. So it seems that in that sense, that and sort of the whole methodology has influenced the way you think about your organization. Is that true?
Yes, it provides a sort of perspective through which to benchmark what we do. And since it's informed by international best practices, it gives you the confidence to to assess what you're doing against parameters that are considered universal for tax organizations across the globe.
Very interesting. So, and I also understand that several of your staff have done the TADAT training. Is it also that, I mean, the way you speak about the performance outcome areas, is that also something you internally discuss about? Well, let's talk about the benchmarking of this area. Has it sort of affected also the way you communicate internally about issues?
I would think so. I would think so, yes. Maybe not specifically as TADAT POAs, but I think as sort of best practices to adhere to and, outcomes to work towards, yes.
That's very interesting. So you already spoke a little bit about GovTech, about the faceless assessments and so on, the work that you are leading. How would you describe the current status of India Revenue Service in terms of its digitalization? How far are you, and sort of what is still to be possible going forward? What is your sort of agenda on digitalization?
Ruud, what I'm going to tell you, of course, is what I know as a consequence of work I do presently. But I think that in India we are fairly advanced with our use of technology. As I mentioned, and if you look at the presentation that I had with you, we have both pay as you earn, which is what we call advanced taxing, and we also have withholding taxes. So we found that collecting economic footprints when a transaction takes place, which is withholding taxes, is extremely useful in tracking the tracking compliance. So part of the direct tax reforms that were launched by the Prime Minister, we extended the scope of reporting of financial transactions. So now, with electricity consumption above 1 lakh rupees per annum, or where there are payments to education institutions by way of fees or donations above 1 lakh of rupees, where there's domestic or foreign, where there are payments to hotels, where there are purchases of jewelry, of white goods, of paintings, etc., where there are deposits or credits in current accounts of a bank above 5 lakhs, or a non-current account of 25 lakhs, payment of property taxes above 20,000, life insurance premiums, health insurance premiums, share transactions, dematerialization accounts, bank lockers. All of those are covered under the scope of the financial transactions which are reported. And I mentioned the sections so that if someone wants to, study it further, they can actually Google it or go to the income tax website, and you have all of the sections. So the section is 285B, and the rule is 114E. So a lot of this data is collected from the reporting of financial transactions. There's a lot of data that comes in through withholding taxes. So there's withholding taxes on a very wide variety of areas. Taxes paid online, there's e-payment of tax, mandatory e-payment for companies, and the returns are filed online, the returns are processed online, and all of your withholding details go into a form called 26AS, which can be viewed by the taxpayer. The returns are mandatorily e-filed. And as I mentioned, all of this data that is collected through what is called Project Insight, using artificial intelligence, is used to profile the taxpayer. It's used to feed into prefilled returns. It's used to aid the computer-aided selection, the CAS selection, and it's also used for profiling, and when the assessments are carried out, when the scrutiny assessments are carried out, the details are available to the tax officer so that he takes into account what's been reported and what hasn't. I think there's technology informing each of our processes, and from start to finish, from payment of taxes to assessment to withholding taxes, credit for withholding taxes, all of that is now digital. So it is GovTech at its finest. And I would think that it should compare with the best anywhere in the world.
That's very interesting to hear. And this is a very interesting story to hear about advancements and the success of also the achievements that you have already made in terms of a successful implementation of all these GovTech solutions. And of course, for the IMF, it's always interesting to do this benchmarking and to look at comparisons. And what we see is that attempts to digitalize tax administration sometimes are very successful, like in the case of India, but it's not always the case. And some countries made attempts to digitalize, but the mistake that people say is sometimes made is that digitalization is more than just adopting a new technology. It requires a transformation of basically the entire organization. And as you described, so maybe you can say a little bit about how you have managed this process of digitalization as a comprehensive reform.
Certainly. So we in the department, we have what is called, we have the Computerized Processing Center, CPC. I don't know, Ruud, I think for taxpayers, something that rates really high in a list of things they want about, several years ago, I was attached with the UK IRS on a sabbatical attachment. And I remember they carried out a survey, and among the topmost, taxpayer demands was being able to deal with their affairs on the phone at the time, on the phone or now online. And now, I mean, from start to finish, and one of the things that really ranks high with taxpayers is getting their refunds on time. I don't know if that's true of, countries like yours, but everyone wants their refund on time, particularly in cases like, contractors and other businesses where tax is being deducted on each transaction. We've been extraordinarily successful in through our CPC, they are called this, the Computerized Processing Centers. And we have one for TDS, which is located at Vaishali. And we have one for income tax, which is located in, for returns, income tax returns, which is located in Bangalore. And both the CPC centers have functioned extremely well and ensured that refunds go out on time. So really from start to finish, from filing a return to obtaining your refund, everything is now online and can be handled online. It has meant that the departmental staff has had to truly up their game and rescale themselves very quickly. The Transparent Taxation platform was announced on the 13th of August 2020, and it couldn't have come at a better time because of the COVID issues and the precautions and the problems around physical attendance of office. So it was a very timely initiative. At the same time, for the department, it meant an immediate sort of upskilling of what we knew. And the department handled it very well. The Central Board of Direct Taxes had an entire package in place where the service providers, who were facilitating the whole implementation of the platform, and traveled across the country, met with people in the smallest of towns, imparted training both online and offline, and officers from the Central Board of Direct Taxes traveled again to various parts of the country to inform people about changes and how to implement them, and how there was support all across. So there have been detailed FAQs that have been issued. There's been detailed manuals that have been prepared, and there are tutorials, online tutorials that are available for officers to, and I'm extremely proud of all our officers because they've truly risen to the occasion and done all of this. But also the Central Board of Direct Taxes showed leadership, and it was really change management at its finest because it was so implemented in such a smooth and seamless fashion with so much support. We also have helplines. And we also have, tickets that we raise for problems that we have, which are, there are help centers, 24-hour help centers that are available to us. So it's been something that required a great deal of learning in a very short span of time, but it was so well managed that I think everyone was able to rise to the occasion and do what they needed to do within time.
That's great to hear. That's because change management can be a big hurdle for many organizations anywhere to make change succeed and be successful. And it's very nice to hear that you have managed it well. How would you say
the Central Board of Direct Taxes has managed it very well?
No, that's very good to hear. How would you say the pandemic has influenced your digitalization agenda? Has it accelerated things, and has it influenced you?
So the pandemic has effectively meant that the government has been very proactive in extending timelines for payments, in extending timelines for filing of returns, and in extending even installments that were payable under a scheme for settling disputes. So for everything, there was a relaxation made and extensions allowed. So that really means that taxes due have given an extended timeline. In terms of, I think the response of the taxpayers has been heartening. They all, I think, across the board have welcomed the faceless assessment scheme, the faceless appeal scheme, and the assessment scheme is extremely well received. For the department, it has meant that we could enforce COVID protocols and ensure that our officers and staff worked in a safe environment and did not have exposure to too much public interaction. And it couldn't have been more timely, the whole transparent taxation initiative.
Okay, thank you very much. So time for one more question before we go to the questions from the audience. One thing you mentioned is the impact also on indirect tax. The VAT and the refunds and so on. How do you think digitalization also opens up opportunities for closer integration of using the information, for instance, from direct and indirect tax and a closer integration of basically the management of different taxes?
The GST reforms are truly, a watershed in the growth of the indirect taxation regime, and the implementation is based on the key the key denominator there is based on the permanent account number, PAN, that is used by the department to identify. It's the unique identifier for a taxpayer. And because it's PAN-based, going forward, we'll be able to integrate the databases, hopefully. But in the planning stage, as on date, I think what we are doing is a limited sharing of data through the Central Board of Direct Taxes. So data requisition by both our department and the GST. And it gives you it gives you a complete picture of the taxpayer's affairs, and also helps you kind of verify the accuracy of the filings before both the tax departments. So that's, that is going to be, again, an area that helps us plug loopholes very effectively.
Okay, thank you very much. So we already spent 40 minutes. Time flies. I have many more questions, but maybe I'll give the floor to Annette, because I think the audience also wants to raise questions to you, Poonam. Annette?
Certainly.
Thank you very much, Ruth. Thank you very much, Poonam. I'd like to open up the floor now to the questions coming in from our audience. My colleague Wofa Ibian will have the first question for either Ruth or Poonam. Thank you.
Thank you, Annette, and thank you, Poonam, for that interesting conversation. So I think the first question is for Poonam. It says, what are the information sources for the pre-filed tax return?
So the sources for the pre-filed tax return, as I mentioned, are the withholding tax footprints that we have. Also, the reporting of the statement of financial transactions that I spoke about, earlier called the annual information reports, and now they're called the SFTs. These are filed by authorities like, the registrar for land deals, the registrar for vehicles. So, as I mentioned, that the scope of SFTs has been wide, and now we're getting information regarding, donations to schools, electricity consumption, domestic travel, payments to hotels, purchases of jewelry. So all of this information is sort of in with the PAN quotation requirement, and then used to profile the tax, and all these transactions can then be shortlisted for pre-filing of returns. So if you sold land, bought land, that's going to be reported through the specified financial transactions requirement, and it would then inform the pre-filled returns. Is that good for you?
Yes, thank you very much. Over to you, Vanessa. You're muted.
Hi, thank you, Poonam. Thank you, Ruth, for this very interesting conversation. My next question goes to Poonam. In terms of risk management, is the taxpayer advised of the risk of revenue in order to encourage voluntary compliance? If so, is this information also sent to the taxpayer facelessly?
I think I may have missed out one of the initiatives of the Indian Income Tax Department. It was called Operation Clean Money. So the information was collected regarding bank transactions, credit cards, share transactions, and this is post demonetization. And the information was then sent facelessly to taxpayers at their email addresses, and they were encouraged to respond and comply through the website. And wherever satisfactory replies were received, those were filed. Where it was then passed on to the assessment units to examine more comprehensively. So yes, the information is received, even in the pre-filled returns, is being shared effectively facelessly. And if it informs the selection and scrutiny, there too, the first notice is issued by the National Faceless Assessment Center, and it includes the reasons why the case has been picked up for deeper scrutiny. So yes, the information that informs the selection is sent out facelessly. And the taxpayer responds online without knowing who they're responding to. So all communications are addressed through the National Faceless Center. If you look at I've given detailed presentations, of course, of the structure and how it all works. So we have National Faceless Assessment Center at Delhi, and then you have the regional Faceless Assessment Center. There's also, and each regional Faceless Assessment Center has assessment units and verification units. So the verification units are used to, where we do not have a digital footprint to reach out to taxpayers. We also have what is called the, the technical unit, where you can refer an issue that requires further scrutiny, and or you want a consistent interpretation of law across the country, which isn't always possible because different high courts, the High Court is the highest court state, and judicial discipline requires that if the issue hasn't been interpreted by the Supreme Court, then the High Court is followed within the state jurisdiction. So subject to the, and we are, India is a common law country, so judicial precedents are, are followed. And so if there is a High Court decision within a particular state, subject to that, the technical units ensure a uniform interpretation of the Act across the country. Does that answer your question, Vanessa, or did I go?
Yes, thank you so much, Poonam. And now to my colleagues, over to you.
Yes, thank you again both for this conversation. So there's another question which states, with all the services listed on the IRS digital website, architectural constraints and legal challenges has India faced in enabling back-end integration and exchange of information by all of the government systems?
Now that's going to require another complete session, and I may not be the most qualified person to really tell you that. I think it'd be better if you invited someone from the Directorate of Systems, because they're the implementing agency. And I'm sure that, there have been constraints in implementation, in sharing, in what I'd like to tell you is that the requirements of privacy and confidentiality are met in India by putting the income tax business application a lease line network. So the lease line network is entirely independent, and all of our data resides on this very secure, confidential network. You can access the business applications via the e-filing website, which is net-based, but the data resides on the lease. The business application resides on the lease line network. We have what are called, the PAN allotment and the payments, etc., are all handled through the TIN NSDL. So NSDL is our National Depository Service, which is also assisting us with PAN allotment, and also has the TIN Facilitation Center. So when you want to file a TDS return, then you bring it on, on a digital media to the TIN Facilitation Center in the kind of in the format prescribed, and then they upload it onto the application. So that, I guess, should be what I'd like to tell you.
Thank you very much, Poonam. And unfortunately, we've run out of time, so I'd like to hand the floor back to Ruud for the last question, please.
Thank you, Annette. Now it's a privilege to be able to ask more question to you, Poonam.
Certainly.
And the question I have is, because we have a lot of people listening from countries, and I think it's very interesting to hear the story from India. So what would be your main message to other countries who are less advanced in their stage of digitalization? And also, how do you think TADAT may help them in this process?
Well, I'd like to say, I'd also like to mention that we have what is called the Directorate of Training in India. And at the apex is the National Academy of Direct Taxes. And it's supported by regional training institutes across the country. And also ministerial training institutes, MSTUs. A lot of the retraining, the upskilling was supported by the NEDT and the RTIs. And we're always happy to assist other countries in devising training programs or in providing assistance. We're also part of various programs like, I think, tax inspectors, for joint audits, etc. So I think if the IMF were to, and in India, we're also very fortunate to have a very robust IT industry, which has supported India's GovTech reforms. So I would think that if the IMF were to reach out to the Indian government and talk to them about assisting with, with consultancy or training or sort of best practices being implemented here, GovTech area, I think it would be beneficial for countries that perhaps are embarking on their reform process.
Thank you so much. That's a very nice answer. So Annette, back to you. Thank you so much, Poonam, for sharing all these experiences.
It's been a privilege, and thank you so much for providing me an opportunity to sort of thank you and for the wonderful TADAT training, and also an opportunity to showcase what India is doing in the GovTech area under the very enlightened leadership being provided by our very charismatic Prime Minister and a very, very, a very committed and efficient Finance Minister, who's a lady, Mrs. Nirmala Sitharaman, and of course our Central Board of Direct Taxes, headed by our chairman. It's been a very interesting journey these past 2 or 3 years, with a lot of reform, and it's wonderful to see it translate into better compliance. The press release issued on the 24th of September 21, and net collections, which means that, you see, gross collection includes refunds. So gross collections are up 64% for the corresponding period last year, and net collection is up 27%. So it's, it's extremely heartening. We have roughly 5.6 crore taxpayers, and I guess there must be something that is working to improve compliance and collections. So I'm so happy to share this with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. On behalf of the TADAT Secretariat, I'd like to thank you, Poonam, for joining us today. Thank you for your insightful intervention. I'm sure our colleagues worldwide will be inspired by the GovTech developments in India. And thank you to you as well, Ruud, for joining us today. and for being our moderator. It's always a pleasure to have you on the TADAT podcast. We invite our audience to take a quick break. We'll be back with a second live podcast recording today at 10:30 a.m. Washington, D.C. time. In the meantime, you could also click subscribe to the TADAT YouTube channel to keep up to date with everything TADAT. See you soon. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.